Disclaimer. The content on this YouTube channel includes true stories, some of which are based on real life facts, and some are fiction. We do not claim ownership of any of the stories presented on this channel. We have sourced stories from various online and offline sources, and we have made reasonable efforts to ensure that the stories are accurate and reliable. However, we cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the information presented. The stories presented on this channel are for entertainment purposes only, and any reliance on the stories is strictly at your own risk. We do not accept any responsibility for any loss, injury, or damage that may arise from your use of the stories or any information presented on this channel. Please note that the stories presented on this channel may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Demonic Diaries, the YouTube channel where we explore the darkest corners of the human mind. Join me, your host, as I delve into the pages of terrifying tales and haunting stories. From the depths of hell to the darkest depths of the human psyche, we'll be your guide through the most bone-chilling and spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. So buckle up and prepare to be scared, because on Demonic Diaries, every story has a dark side. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of new videos. Let's get started. Number 1. There is something weird in our wardrobe. The basement, which was situated at the far end of our old creaky house, had always been a source of mystery and intrigue for me. Its dark, imposing door stood there, forever closed and locked, as a constant reminder of the boundary my parents had set. As I grew up, I was strictly forbidden from ever entering it, my parents issuing stern warnings about the unknown and potentially perilous dangers that lurk within its shadowy depths. As a child, my imagination would run wild as I often wondered what could be so treacherous that my parents would not let me enter. They would always be vague with their explanations, simply emphasizing that it was off limits, and that I should never venture near it. This air of secrecy only fueled my curiosity, and I found myself frequently daydreaming about the hallway, and the eerie sense of enigma that surrounded it. The more my parents forbade me from entering the hallway, the more my curiosity grew. I would sneak down at night, tiptoeing as silently as I could, straining my ears to hear any whisper of a sound that might escape from behind that impenetrable door. On some nights, I would swear I heard faint, unidentifiable noises, which only served to amplify my curiosity and determination to one day unveil the truth. One night, when everyone was in their bedroom, I finally decided to take a peek inside the basement. It was closed by a padlock, but a few weeks ago I secretly followed my dad and saw where he hid the keys. It was in a flower pot in the living room. However, I did not understand why the ring had 2 keys instead of just one. There was only one door to the basement, so it was a bit odd. I slowly pushed open the door, the creaking sound of the hinges echoing through the air like an alarm bell. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding with excitement and nervousness, as I slowly stepped inside. I turned on the light by pulling a cord hanging from the ceiling, and faint light from below casted mysterious shadows on the stairs. My heart was racing as I crept forward, my gaze continuously shifting from one door to the next, desperately trying to find the one I had been warned of. The basement was dimly lit, with only a single flickering light bulb that seemed to barely hold on to life, casting strange, elongated shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The worn-out dusty floorboards creaked ominously underfoot, as if protesting any attempt to uncover the secrets hidden within. The walls were adorned with cobwebs, which danced lazily in the subtle drafts that seemed to permeate the very essence of the basement. The only thing I could find there was a single old rusty metal wardrobe, standing there lonely. This was really strange. There were no tools, no desk, no clatter, nothing. Just a single wardrobe. The massive metal wardrobe stood imposingly in the corner of the dimly lit room, its towering height and sheer bulk, a testament to the passage of time. Its once shiny surface, now marred by decades of wear and tear, was covered in a patina of rust and grime that seemed to tell countless stories of forgotten years. The intricate weathered engravings etched across its facade spoke of an era long past, their once vibrant details now barely discernible beneath the layers of corrosion. As I approached the wardrobe, I could not help but feel a sense of awe at its sheer size, which dwarfed everything else in the room. The thick reinforced metal doors were securely fastened shut and held in place by an equally massive and ancient padlock. This padlock, forged from iron and bearing the scars of time, hung heavily from a large, sturdy hasp. Its keyhole, choked with dust and debris, seemed to defy any attempt at intrusion. Now I understood what the other key was for. As I stood before the wardrobe, I could feel the cold emanating from its metal surface, a chilling reminder of the unyielding nature of the materials that compassed it. The air around it seemed to hang heavy with a sense of mystery, as if the wardrobe had been silently guarding its secrets for eternity. The weight of the padlock was evident, as it pulled the hasp downward, causing a slight warp in the metal doors. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally opened it. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the same sense of dread and curiosity that had driven me to enter this basement. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the door, my trembling hands wrapping around the cold metal. Inside, a strange and wondrous sight was waiting for me, a sight that left me utterly awestruck and captivated. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw a miniature replica of our house, complete with tiny figures of our family, living their lives inside this tiny world. The miniature house was complete with its familiar facade, the intricate engravings on the door, and the same weathered window panes. It was as if the very essence of our home had been meticulously and lovingly captured, and then magically shrunken down to an almost impossibly small scale. Not only was the exterior of the miniature house a mirror image of our own, but as I peered through its tiny windows, I could see that the interior was just as faithfully and astonishingly reproduced. The familiar layout of the rooms, the wallpaper patterns, and even the smallest of knickknacks that adored our home, could all be found within this incredible work of art. It was as if someone had taken the time to observe and document every aspect of our home, down to the most minute detail, and had then recreated it all in this miniature masterpiece. But perhaps the most mesmerizing aspect of this tiny world was the presence of tiny figures, representing our family, living their lives inside this diminutive replica. Each figure was expertly crafted, their features and expressions so vivid and lifelike that it was almost eerie. As I observed them closely, I could see my mother sitting in her bedroom, in her favorite armchair, her miniature face bearing the same expression of concentration as she read the tiny newspaper in her hands. My father, on the other hand, was sleeping in their bed peacefully. My sister, with her paintbrush in hand, was focused on creating her latest masterpiece in her room, while my brother was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by his collection of miniature toy cars. Then I realized this is what they normally did around that time. This is what they were actually doing at that particular moment. What made the sight even more creepy and shocking was the basement, where a figure of me stood in front of the wardrobe, doing exactly what I was doing right then. Number 2. I was never born. Like many of you, I read the story posted yesterday about C-section babies not being born, and how their bodies believe they're still in the womb. I don't know what happened to the main character, but I do know the notion isn't that far-fetched. I'm a C-section baby. I'm also completely paralyzed. A drunk driver hit me while I was crossing the road. Don't drink and drive, people. I live in the hospital now, only able to move my eyes, and my mother is my connection to the world. I'd never felt that connection when I was healthy. My own senses dominated. But now my days are stale. I can't eat. I can't move. I can't feel. At night, the only sounds come from the machinery around me. It was at night when I first noticed. The night I broke and cried, hating my life. I remember the tears stinging my eyes. I remember my stuttering breaths wheezing through the tube in my throat. I remember freezing when I heard a muffled voice. Then I heard a less muffled one. Deeper than usual, but the cadence and tone were unmistakable. It was my mother. I opened my eyes, confused. There was no one in the room. The glowing clock on the wall said it was 9:30. My mother should be home, putting my little sister to bed. I closed my eyes again. I could hear her singing a lullaby. She sounded like she was all around me, hugging me with her voice. I thought I was imagining it, or that I'd lost my mind from frustration. The next day, I told her what happened, and she confirmed that she was indeed singing to my sister at that time. We were stunned, yet curious. Over the next few days, we tested this new phenomenon. With both of us actively focusing on our connection, I began hearing my mother's conversations all the time. The others' voices weren't as clear, but hers I quickly learned to understand. I also began tasting what she ate. The flavors were fainter than if I was the one eating, but it was a joyous surprise. After this discovery, my mother went out of her way to eat my favorite foods. She also stopped smoking and began working out, both of us hoping this would reflect on my health as well. I can say with confidence I feel better, but I don't know if it's due to this, or due to finally having an outlet. The connection soon spread to emotions. I could sense what she was feeling, and to her delight, she could sense my emotions too. She had to focus more than I did, since her life was hectic compared to mine, but whenever she felt I was down and she wasn't nearby, she'd sing to me. We didn't tell anyone. It was our secret. We even learned Morse code so she could talk to me in public without anyone knowing. She'd wear a hollow ring and tap it with her nail, and the sound resonated clearly. My resentment of having my life unfairly downgraded mellowed now that my mother was my window to the world. She rescued me. And one day, it was my turn to rescue her. It was my birthday, and she'd gone to the supermarket after work to pick up cupcakes. I was salivating, trying to will her to eat one right then and there. Either she sensed my impatience or just knew me that well, because a few seconds later I was in saccharine heaven. After paying, my mother said she was going to head over to the neighbors to pick up my sister, so they could visit me to celebrate. I could hear the trunk slam and the engine rumble, and my pulse raced when I heard a loud crack, my mother's shock becoming mine. Her anger and exasperation took over. She said a van had backed into her car in the parking lot. I could hear her talking about damages and insurance with a man, and my eyes flew open in fear when she screamed. Our terror merged, and my thoughts ran wild as I tried to figure out what was happening. She was no longer talking to me, despite my overwhelming worry, and my panic surged. I couldn't sense her emotions anymore. My machines beat as my heart ran amok, and my breath wheezed, and a nurse ran into my room. I pleaded with my eyes, begging for my communication board, and I watched in helpless horror as he injected me with a sedative. I woke up 3 hours later, and reality flooded me like ice water. My fury radiated at the nurse. If my mother ended up dead, I was putting the full blame on him. Relief eclipsed my rage when I heard my mother. She was mumbling. I couldn't understand her. Was she gag? My fears restarted as I tried to focus. Her life depended on me. She was repeating the same pattern with her grunts. Morse code. Letters and numbers. A license plate. Then she screamed again. My pulse ran wild, and so did the machines. 2 nurses ran in, and I looked at them with despair, tears trickling down my face. The same man was ready to sedate me again, but the new nurse stopped him. She dried my tears, and my hope rose when she brought over the communication board. It was a chart my mother had made for me, the alphabet divided into 5 groups, the numbers into 2. I blinked when the nurse pointed to the right group, and I blinked again when she pointed to the right letter number. It took a while, but I managed to explain the situation. They stared at me, and my frustration roared. I looked at the board again, ready to explain how I knew so they could stop staring and call the police. Instead of holding it up, though, they left, and my machine's cacophony restarted as I screamed in my head. A lullaby hugged me. My mother. Caring for me despite the hell she was going through. Still communicating in Morse code, she told me she was proud of me. I could tell she was getting tired, her grunts becoming hoarse. She was scared, worried, angry. I wished I could sing to her. Instead, I let my love for her take over, hoping it would soothe her. The doctor walked in, followed by the 2 nurses. He held up the board and asked me how I knew my mother was reported missing. I was relieved someone had reported it while I was unconscious, but I didn't know how to explain my knowledge. Afraid of wasting time, I told him I dreamt it and pleaded with them to hurry and save her. They were baffled, but to my tearful relief, they called the police with my information. While some cops followed the lead, others questioned me. With my mother and sister being my only visitors, they asked if this was a scam we'd hatched to make me a famous clairvoyant and get me much needed funds. Everyone was finally treating me like a human again instead of a vegetable, but I didn't appreciate the unfounded accusations. Afraid of being misunderstood, I closed my eyes, refusing to communicate. My frantic pulse woke the machines around me, and the doctor demanded the interrogation be stopped. With no more distractions, I focused on my mother. I couldn't hear her. I couldn't sense her either. Was she asleep? Or had something terrible happened to her? I opened my eyes, and a kind nurse rushed over to dry my tears and hold up the communication board. I asked her to please keep in touch with the police and let me know the latest news. She promised. An hour later, she cheered as she told me they'd arrested the man and found my mother and 2 other women in his basement, drugged but alive. I cried tears of joy. It didn't take long for everyone to see that we had nothing to do with this inhumanity. They made space for my mother's bed in my room, and she recovered by my side, both of us grateful for the other. We were freed of suspicion, but not of curiosity. They even got me an electronic board that monitors my eye movements, so I could type my replies. I found all the attention exhausting. Thankfully, my mother took care of answering all the questions, sparing me any discomfort. We never told the truth. Until today. I don't know if every C-section baby is able to nurture this innate connection, or if it's just something unique between my mother and me, but after reading that story yesterday, we agreed to finally share our experience. As for what will happen after my mother passes, we don't know, so we've decided to remain optimistic. Number 3. It was a cold winter's night in Freeport. My husband and I were seated watching TV, he in his chair and I on the couch. Across the room, the length of our single-story ranch house, there is a lone window looking directly into the living room from the yard. I noticed the figure approaching slowly before subsequently ducking down, so that only his eyes were visible. He knelt down and began to watch us. And watch and watch and watch. The room was mostly dark, and the pale moonlight blanched him dimly. Either his eyes were enormous, or they were sunken into deep, hollow sockets. He looked like a lunatic. A chill crawled up and down my flesh. My heart began to race, and my blood pressure had catapulted so quickly that my head began to throb and pound, and, despite the internal hurricane taking place, I at first pretended not to notice. I kept my eyes fixed on my husband, chatting and laughing as if nothing horrifying was taking place. I kept the intruder in bird's eye view for several minutes, hoping he'd just up and leave, taking no interest in our ordinary, sedate state of affairs. Let me also mention that it was 6 degrees outside. I continued on with just the same frame of attitude as the time I was robbed at gunpoint years before. I learned that I have a unique ability to remain externally calm despite the fire in my veins and the quaking of my being. Outside, I'm ice, but inside, I'm a tree shaken of all its leaves. Barely, after about 10 minutes, I swear that every time I looked at the blank face and noticed it was still there, peeping in a polar vortex, I nearly screamed. I made a decision. Inside, I was absolutely breaking. Each moment that I turned to the TV and then shifted back, my heart skipped several beats. Finally, with my face turned away, I said to my husband through my teeth, "Honey, do not look and do not react, but there is a man looking at us through the window right now. Don't look." Despite my urging, his impulse got the better of him. The moment he rose from the chair and turned, the peeper had leaped from view. I told him we needed to call 911. However, before I could even turn on my screen, the knob to the front door began to tremble and shake convulsively. My husband commanded me to run to our room, a command which he followed as well, which, in such a tumultuous moment, was our only defense because by then, the intruder was throwing himself against the front door. The jamb and hinge were audibly cracking, all of the items on the glass living room refectory table had begun to tremble and clatter, and the walls all reverberated thunderously. With all of my strength, my husband had fused discs in his back, so he was totally incapable of assisting. I grasped the bureau by the legs, and with all my puny might, dragged the son of a bitch across the floor, and finally, in one final throw of desperation, pushed it against the door. In the midst of this midnight whirlwind, the front door had been kicked open, and the footsteps, incredibly heavy ones, had tramped down the hallway, as if his legs were leaden with 200-pound blocks of ice, though it hadn't sunk in into lie, fresh out of breath and flushed in icy hot sweat, had tumbled backwards onto the bed. "I have a gun," my husband shouted repeatedly as the intruder began throwing his weight against the door. Assuming he might also be armed, we slunk to the far side of the bed and ducked down. I phoned 911, and they assured me the police were currently in pursuit. It's an incredibly small, derelict steel town in western Pennsylvania, hollowed out by the terminus of the steel boom. The police arrived imminently, but in between the call, the threats, and the arrival of PD, I noticed something strange. Something that truly chilled me to the bone. At some point, the intruder halted, and in a shrill, gravelly tone that sounded devilishly feminine, shouted a few simple words, which had been repeated several times. "This isn't your house. This is not your house." He pounded furiously on the door as he shouted, if you could even call it shouting, these words with an almost compendious conviction. My husband, who at the time had been battling bronchitis, was gasping for elusive gulps of air with such severity, I was afraid he might faint or, worse, succumb to asphyxiation. In a flash, the police had arrived. The 1,000-pound footsteps retreated, but not before a throng of screams rang out from the front doorway. Shots were fired, and voices had gone frenetic. I removed the dresser and ran out. An officer was splayed out on his back half in and half out of the house, and was screaming with every fiber of his soul. All I could see was blood everywhere. Smeared on the walls, even. "Don't come out here," shouted an officer as he called for a medic. But the image was burned in. The first responding officer had been slashed from temple to chin, left to right, and was screaming and rolling chaotically, as if he was being immolated, and had desperately taken to putting himself out. That haunting vision has only grown stronger and with greater clarity since. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't see the flashing terror in his eyes, and the gaping of his mouth as he cried out, "I'm blind. Gary, I'm fucking blind. I'll never see her again. Diane. Diane." We watched out the window of the bedroom as flashlights played upon the black frozen woods like strobes. Seeing them spread so broadly only made my heart sink, and soon after, an officer came calling. "Do you have a friend or relative you could stay with tonight?" This being a most disheartening sign, we went and stayed with our son and daughter-in-law for 2 nights, until we could fortify the house with new doors, triple-paned windows and a full alarm system. For weeks, months, even, we walked around on our toes while continuously throwing glances over our shoulders everywhere we went, but what was most disconcerting was that we felt more vulnerable locked behind closed doors. To this day, the intruder hasn't been found. I looked into previous owners of our house. We had been living there 18 years by then, and the scent on the trail of discovery was non-existent. I still don't know what about our house isn't ours, and I'm not sure I want to know. This occurred in 2020, just as COVID had begun to scorch the earth. One thing I know intuitively, however, is that no matter how much time passes, unless I grow a third eye on the back of my head, I will never be comfortable again. Thanks for tuning in to Demonic Diaries, where we explore the darkest corners of the human psyche. Stay tuned for more spine-tingling tales, and don't forget to keep the lights on. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and embrace the darkness. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Demonic Diaries for more terrifying tales. Your support helps us bring you more hair-raising content, so be sure to hit that notification bell to never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.